When Sarah Miller saw her father's casket lowered into the ground, the Kansas soil seemed to swallow more than just his body. It took her childhood, her certainty, and the last thread connecting her to the family farm. The bitter November wind carried the scent of coming snow as it whipped across the cemetery, tugging at the black dress she'd bought specially for this day. Her father, John Miller, once the proudest farmer in Butler County, now lay beneath the same earth he'd worked for 63 years, leaving behind more questions than answers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah stood alone at the grave long after the other mourners had drifted away. Her brother Michael had flown back to Chicago immediately after the service, citing important business meetings he couldn't postpone. 20 years in the city had scrubbed the farm from his hands, though not from his inheritance claims. Their sister Rebecca hadn't even bothered to come, sending a floral arrangement with a card that read simply, "He understood why I stayed away." The family farm, 300 acres of wheat fields, a weathered 2-story farmhouse, and a massive red barn that had stood for over a century now hung in limbo. According to the lawyer's preliminary reading, John had left the land to all 3 children equally, despite Sarah being the only one who'd stayed to help him run it after their mother died 7 years ago. "You should sell," Michael had told her bluntly at the funeral reception, nursing a whiskey in the kitchen where they'd grown up. "The place is barely breaking even." Dad was too stubborn to admit it, but you know it's true. Sarah had said nothing, just stared out at the barn silhouetted against the darkening sky. That barn had been her playground, her sanctuary, and later, her workshop where she'd restored antique furniture to supplement the farm's dwindling income. Now it was part of a legacy she wasn't sure she could preserve. The farm had never been just land to Sarah. It was the place where 5 generations of Millers had weathered droughts, survived the Dust Bowl, and celebrated bumper crops. It was where her great-grandmother had planted the oak tree that now shaded the front porch, where her father had taught her to drive a tractor when her feet barely reached the pedals, where she'd nursed her mother through cancer until the end. Sarah's boots crunched across the frozen ground as she made her way back to her truck. At 42, her face showed the weathering of someone who'd spent their life outdoors, fine lines around her eyes from squinting into the sun, hands calloused from work no moisturizer could soften. She'd never married. The farm had been commitment enough. The drive home took her past fields lying fallow for winter, past neighbors' farms where lights glowed in windows, past the Miller Farms Est 1889 sign her grandfather had carved decades ago. When she pulled into the long gravel driveway, the emptiness of the house hit her anew. No smoke curling from the chimney. No father waiting with coffee percolating on the stove. Inside, the silence pressed against her eardrums. She moved through rooms still filled with her father's presence, his reading glasses on the side table, his boots by the door, yesterday's newspaper folded to the crossword puzzle he'd never finish. Sarah poured herself 3 fingers of her father's bourbon and sat at the kitchen table, opening the folder the lawyer had given her. Beyond the land division, there was little else to inherit. Some modest savings. A 15-year-old truck with 200,000 miles on it. Farm equipment that was worth more in sentimental value than dollars. And debt more than Sarah had realized. John Miller had taken out a second mortgage 3 years ago, one he'd never mentioned to her. "Why, Dad?" she whispered to the empty room. "What were you thinking?" The bank statement showed a withdrawal of nearly all the mortgage money on a single day, with no explanation of where it had gone. It hadn't gone into the farm, the equipment was still old, the irrigation system still outdated, the roof still leaking in the north corner of the house. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Realtor friend says we could list by end of month. 3-way split after debts. Call me." She put the phone face down without responding and drained her glass. Outside, snow had begun to fall, large flakes visible in the yard light. Sarah grabbed her father's heavy coat from its hook. It would be cold in the barn, and she needed to check on the pregnant cat that had taken up residence there last month. The walk to the barn was one she could make blindfolded. 57 steps from back door to barn door. The massive structure loomed dark against the night sky, snow already beginning to dust its roof. Sarah tugged open the side door, hinges protesting with a familiar creak. She flipped the light switch, and the bare bulbs illuminated the cavernous space. The barn had been built by her great-grandfather, constructed of hand-hewn oak beams that had darkened with age to a deep amber. The main floor was divided into sections, the old milking stalls now used for storage, the workshop area where her furniture projects sat half-finished, and the central open space where hay bales were stacked in neat rows. The cat, a scraggly calico, emerged from behind a stack of crates, her swollen belly swaying as she approached Sarah for ear scratches. "Hey there, Mama," Sarah murmured. "Won't be long now." As she filled the cat's bowl with kibble, Sarah's eyes drifted to the grain storage area at the far end of the barn. It was a separate room with heavy doors, designed to keep the harvested grain dry and safe from rodents. Her father had insisted on maintaining it even after they'd switched to using the metal silos for most storage. "Family history in there," he'd say whenever she suggested converting the space to something more useful. The last wheat harvest had been poor, and they'd stored only a partial load in the old grain room. Sarah hadn't been in there since September. Now, with the weight of the farm's future pressing on her, she felt drawn to it like a final connection to her father's priorities. The doors to the grain room were secured with an old padlock. Sarah used the key from her ring, the same key that had hung on her father's belt every day of his farming life. The mechanism was stiff from disuse, but it finally yielded with a satisfying click. Inside, the sweet, dusty smell of wheat enveloped her. The partial harvest formed a golden hill against the far wall, leaving most of the concrete floor bare. But something was different. Sarah frowned, playing her flashlight beam across the room. The grain had been disturbed, creating an unnatural valley in its center. "Damn mice," she muttered, stepping closer to inspect the damage. But as her light swept across the depression, she noticed something that made her heart skip: a corner of metal protruding from beneath the wheat. Sarah knelt and began brushing grain aside with her hands. The metal expanded into a handle, then the outline of what appeared to be a trapdoor, set flush with the concrete. Flora trapdoor she'd never known existed in all her years on the farm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her fingers trembled as they traced the edge of the door. Why would her father have a hidden compartment beneath the grain room? And why had he never mentioned it? The handle was small but sturdy, designed for discreet access. Sarah gripped it and pulled. The door resisted at first, then lifted with a groan of metal hinges that hadn't moved in what sounded like years. The opening revealed a dark space below and the top of a wooden ladder. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating what appeared to be a small room dug beneath the barn floor. "Dad, what did you do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. The secret space beckoned, but something made her hesitate, a lifetime of respecting her father's boundaries perhaps. Or maybe the fear of discovering something that would forever change how she saw him. The ladder looked solid enough despite its age. Sarah tested it with her weight before slowly descending into the unknown space. The room was larger than it had first appeared, roughly 10 feet square with a low ceiling that forced her to stoop slightly. The earthen walls had been reinforced with wooden beams, and the floor was packed dirt covered partially with worn carpet. But it was the contents of the room that stole Sarah's breath. Lining the walls were shelves filled with metal boxes, old leather suitcases, and stacks of documents yellowed with age. In one corner stood a vintage floor safe with a combination dial, its black paint chipped, but the mechanism intact. Sarah's flashlight beam caught something gleam on a center table, a photograph in a silver frame. She picked it up, wiping dust from the glass with her sleeve. The image showed her father, much younger, standing beside a woman Sarah had never seen before. They were smiling, the woman's hand resting on a stack of what looked like ledgers. On the back of the frame, written in her father's distinctive handwriting, "Anna and me, 1978, the beginning." Anna, a name Sarah had never heard. The date 1978 was a year before her father had met her mother. Sarah set down the photograph, her mind spinning. Who was this woman? What beginning was her father referring to? And most importantly, what was hidden in this underground room that he'd kept secret from his entire family? With hands that wouldn't quite steady, Sarah opened one of the metal boxes on the nearest shelf. Inside were stacks of cash, not new bills, but older currency, organized in neat bundles and wrapped in plastic to protect against moisture. She opened another box. More cash, along with several gold coins in protective cases. The leather suitcase contained folders filled with documents, deeds, certificates, and what appeared to be ownership papers for properties Sarah had never heard of. Properties not in Kansas, but scattered across Colorado, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. She moved to the safe, staring at its combination dial with mounting confusion. What were the chances she could guess the code? On impulse, she tried her father's birthday, September 22, 45. The dial turned smoothly, but the handle didn't budge. Her mother's birthday yielded the same result. Sarah sat back on her heels, trying to process what she was seeing. Her father, the man who'd worn the same pair of work boots until they fell apart, who'd lectured them about saving every penny, who'd deferred equipment upgrades because the old one still has some life in it, had a hidden room filled with cash, gold, and what appeared to be significant hidden assets. The farm's struggling finances, the second mortgage, her father's insistence on keeping the grain room operational despite its inefficiency, all of it seemed connected to this secret space and whatever purpose it served. As Sarah continued exploring, she found a leather-bound journal tucked between two boxes. The first entry was dated March 1978. Anna says we need to be smarter than them. Diversify and hide it in plain sight. The farm is perfect. Who would look twice at a struggling wheat farmer? I don't like keeping secrets, but after what happened to her father, I understand the necessity. This will protect our family when the time comes. Sarah flipped through more entries, pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet assemble falling into place. References to acquisitions, arrangements with people whose names meant nothing to her, calculations of growth and compound interest. A parallel financial life her father had maintained for decades, hidden literally beneath the surface of their everyday existence. The final entry was dated just 3 months ago, not long before his heart attack. Sarah will need to know soon. The arrangements are complete. When she finds this place, she understands why I've done what I've done. It was always for them, even if they never knew. Especially for her, she's the only one who truly loved this land like I do. The journal slipped from Sarah's hands. Her father had intended for her to find this place. Perhaps not now, not like this, but eventually. Whatever secret life he'd been leading, whatever wealth he'd been accumulating underground while they pinched pennies above, he'd meant for her to inherit not just the knowledge, but the responsibility. As snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the farm in white silence, Sarah Miller sat surrounded by her father's secrets, faced with a decision. She could tell Michael and Rebecca, share whatever fortune lay hidden beneath their father's barn. She could fulfill whatever mysterious arrangements her father had referenced. Or she could close the trapdoor and pretend she'd never found this underground vault that challenged everything she thought she knew about John Miller. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. Another text from Michael. Realtor needs to know about equipment value. What stays, what goes. Also, Rebecca wants her share in cash ASAP. Sarah looked from the phone to the journal, to the photograph of her father and the mysterious Anna. The weight of legacy pressed down on her shoulders, not just the legacy of land and buildings that had seemed so important this morning, but something deeper and more complex. As she climbed back up the ladder, one thing became clear. The farm she'd thought she knew, the legacy she'd been fighting to preserve, was just the surface of a much larger story. And now, for better or worse, that story was hers to continue. Sarah closed the trapdoor and carefully rearranged the grain to hide it from casual observation. Whatever she decided, it wouldn't be tonight. She needed time to read through all the documents, to understand what her father had built beneath the grain. As she secured the padlock on the grain room door, a strange calm settled over her. For the first time since her father's death, the future didn't feel like an ending. The farm might hold more than memories and tradition. It might hold the key to something her father had spent a lifetime building in secret. Outside, her footprints from earlier were already disappearing under fresh snow, the path between house and barn vanishing into unmarked white. By morning, no one would know she'd made the journey at all. Some secrets, it seemed, the land kept willingly. Sarah watched dawn break over the farm from her father's chair on the porch, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. She hadn't slept. How could she, with the weight of what she discovered pressing against her chest? The secret room beneath the grain had altered something fundamental about her understanding of her father, the man she thought she knew better than anyone. The morning light painted the barn in shades of amber and rust. It stood solid against the pale winter sky, revealing nothing of its secrets to the casual observer. Just like her father had appearing to be nothing more than a hard-working, sometimes struggling farmer while maintaining an entire hidden financial life underground. Sarah's phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. It was Lawrence Holloway, her father's attorney, calling earlier than she'd expected. "Sarah, I apologize for the hour, but there's been a development," he said, his voice carrying that careful tone lawyers use when delivering complicated news. "Your brother has filed papers to expedite the liquidation of your father's estate. He's citing the farm's outstanding debts as justification." Sarah's grip tightened on her mug. "He can't do that without my agreement, can he? The will divides everything equally. Technically, he needs consensus from all three heirs, but he's arguing that the debts create an urgency that overrides normal proceedings. He claims you're emotionally attached to the property and not making rational financial decisions." "It's been 4 days since the funeral," Sarah said, her voice barely controlled. 4 days. "I know. That's why I'm calling. There's something else you should know. Your father left a sealed letter with me, to be delivered to you privately after his death. I had planned to give it to you at our meeting next week, but given Michael's actions, I think you should have it today. Can you come to my office this morning?" Sarah drove into town with the windows down despite the cold, needing the bite of the wind to keep her alert after her sleepless night. Butler County's countryside rolled past other farms, some prospering, some showing signs of the same financial strain that had supposedly gripped Miller Farms. Had those farmers also dug secret rooms beneath their barns? Were there other hidden fortunes tucked away under wheat and corn and soybeans, unknown even to the families who worked the land above? Lawrence Holloway's office occupied the second floor of the old bank building on Main Street. His father had been the attorney before him, and his grandfather before that. The Holloways had handled the legal affairs of Butler County farmers since before the Dust Bowl. If anyone might have insight into her father's secret life, it would be Lawrence. The office smelled of leather-bound law books and coffee. Lawrence, a trim man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a shock of white hair, rose to greet her. "Sarah, thank you for coming quickly." He gestured to a chair across from his desk, then opened a drawer and removed an envelope. "Your father left this with me about 3 months ago. Said it was for your eyes only, and only after he was gone. The envelope was sealed with red wax, impressed with what appeared to be an unfamiliar crest. Not the Miller family initial she would have expected. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal and unfolded several pages of her father's distinctive handwriting. "Do you know what's in here?" she asked Lawrence. No, attorney-client privilege extended to the envelope itself, but not its contents. "Whatever's in there, John wanted only you to know." Sarah began to read. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I've passed on, likely before I could tell you everything face to face as I'd planned. First, forgive me for the secrets I've kept. They began before you were born and grew more complex with each passing year until telling the truth seemed impossible without destroying everything we'd built. By now, you may have discovered the room beneath the grain store. If not, you need to find it. The key to the padlock is the same one that opens the south field gate. Under the grain, there's a trapdoor. What you'll find there will change everything you thought you knew about our family and the farm. The truth starts with a woman named Anna Dietrich. She was brilliant, beautiful, and the heir to the Dietrich banking fortune in Chicago. We met by chance in 1978 when her car broke down near our property. I was 28, she was 25. We fell in love in a way I never thought possible, and we made plans to marry. Anna's father, Heinrich Dietrich, was a powerful man who controlled his family with the same precision he controlled his banking empire. He disapproved of me, a dirt-poor Kansas farmer with nothing to offer his daughter except my heart and my land. When Anna defied him and told him she was coming to live with me on the farm, he threatened to disinherit her. What neither of us knew then was that Heinrich was involved in illegal banking activities, laundering money for organizations that would stop at nothing to protect their interests. Anna discovered documentation of these activities and confronted her father, threatening to expose him if he didn't allow her to live her own life. 3 weeks later, Anna disappeared. The official report said she'd run her car off a bridge accident, case closed. But she'd called me the night before, excited about evidence she'd gathered against her father. She was coming to me, she said. She never arrived. I went to the police, but Heinrich's influence ran deep. No one would listen. I tried to examine her car, the accident scene, anything that might prove it wasn't an accident. Every avenue was blocked. A week after the funeral, a package arrived at the farm. Inside were documents, banking records, ledgers, photographs, everything Anna had gathered, along with a letter she'd written to me. She'd mailed it before leaving Chicago, a backup plan in case something happened to her. The evidence showed not just money laundering, but connections to organized crime going back decades. I was a young man full of rage and grief. I wanted justice for Anna. I took the evidence to a federal prosecutor in Kansas City, someone with no connections to Chicago or the Dietrich family. 2 days later, that prosecutor was killed in what police called a mugging gone wrong. That's when I realized what I was up against. These people had reached beyond anything I could fight. If I pursued this, I would die just like Anna, just like the prosecutor, and her father would never face justice. So I made a different plan. I would use Anna's evidence not to destroy her father in court, but to slowly, systematically dismantle his empire from the shadows. The documentation she'd gathered included account numbers, contacts, methods, a blueprint of the Dietrich criminal operation. With the help of a trusted friend who worked in banking, Everett Holloway, Lawrence's father, I began transferring small amounts from Dietrich's hidden accounts. Not enough to notice at once, but steady, continuous withdrawals that I invested in land, gold, stocks, and cash holdings, all under various names and entities that could never be traced back to John Miller. For 40 years, I've been bleeding the Dietrich empire dry, $1 at a time. Heinrich died in 1992, never knowing who was slowly eroding his wealth. His associates and partners have been searching for the leak for decades. They never thought to look at a struggling wheat farm in Kansas. The money in that room, it's not really mine. It's what I've recovered from the people who murdered the woman I loved. I've been gathering it, protecting it, waiting for the right moment to use it for what Anna would have wanted. The second mortgage on the farm was the final piece. I needed to create a legitimate paper trail for a large transfer from one of the last Dietrich accounts. The money never went into the farm, it went into the room, converted to cash and gold that can't be tracked. Now it's done, and the responsibility falls to you. In the safe beneath the grain room combination 031478, the day I met Anna, you'll find detailed instructions for what to do next. There's a foundation set up in Chicago that supports victims of organized crime. All of the assets in that room are designated for transfer to that foundation, completing what Anna started 40 years ago. But there's a complication. Some of Heinrich's former associates are still alive, still powerful, still looking for whoever has been bleeding their accounts all these years. The final transfer will expose the whole operation. When that happens, they'll come looking. That's why I've made arrangements. In that safe, you'll also find documents for a new identity, a property in Montana under a different name, and enough clean, untraceable money to start a new life far from Kansas. After you complete the transfer to the foundation, you need to disappear. At least until the federal investigation I've arranged through an anonymous source reaches its conclusion. I know this is an impossible burden to place on your shoulders. You've already sacrificed so much for this farm, for me. I planned to tell you everything, to give you a choice, but time ran out. The farm itself is still divided equally among you, Michael, and Rebecca, as my will states. But what's beneath the grain, that was never mine to give. It belongs to Anna's memory and to justice long delayed. I love you, Sarah. More than this land, more than justice, more than anything. Which is why I'm giving you an out. In the safe is also a sealed envelope with Everett Holloway's name on it. If you choose not to take on this burden, deliver that envelope to Lawrence. He'll handle everything, and you can walk away, sell the farm, live your life without this shadow hanging over you. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of the woman you've become. A woman of principle, like Anna was. Perhaps that's why I couldn't bear to watch you leave this place, even when opportunities called you elsewhere. You reminded me of her, the strength, the determination, the deep well of compassion beneath the practical exterior. With eternal love, Dad. Sarah lowered the letter, her vision blurred with tears. The father she thought she knew, the simple, hard-working farmer who'd raised her, had been living a double life as some kind of vigilante financial avenger, systematically dismantling a criminal empire while maintaining the perfect cover of a struggling Kansas wheat farm. "Are you all right?" Lawrence asked, concern etching his features. "Did you know?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did your father tell you anything about my dad and a woman named Anna Dietrich?" Lawrence's expression shifted subtly, not surprise, but caution. "My father kept his clients' confidences, even from me. But he did tell me, before he passed, that John Miller was a man who carried a burden few could imagine, and that someday I might be called upon to help ease that burden. Is that time now, Sarah?" Sarah folded the letter carefully, buying time as her mind raced. "I need to think," she finally said. "This is complicated." "Of course." Lawrence nodded. "But Sarah, given what Michael is attempting with the estate, you may not have much time to decide your course of action. Whatever your father entrusted to you, whatever decision you need to make, it might be best to make it quickly." As Sarah drove back to the farm, her father's letter burned like a brand in her pocket. The world outside her truck window looked unchanged, the same fields, the same sky, the same neighboring farms she'd known all her life. But everything had shifted. The father she'd mourned wasn't who she'd thought. The farm wasn't just a farm. And now she faced an impossible choice: honor her father's 40-year mission or protect herself from the danger that came with it. When she pulled into the driveway, A black SUV she didn't recognize was parked by the house. For a moment, her heart seized. Had Heinrich Dietrich's associates somehow already learned of her father's death? Were they here, searching for the fortune he'd siphoned from them over decades? But the figure that emerged from the SUV was familiar, her sister Rebecca, looking as out of place on the farm as she always had. Even at their father's funeral, Rebecca had managed to avoid actually setting foot on the property, meeting them directly at the cemetery and leaving immediately after. At 38, Rebecca was the youngest of the Miller siblings, and the one who'd fled farthest physically to San Diego, emotionally to a life where she never mentioned her farming background to the tech executives and venture capitalists she now moved among. Her designer boots were already gathering dust from the driveway as she walked toward Sarah, her face set in the practiced neutral expression she used for negotiations. "I didn't expect to see you here," Sarah said, climbing out of her truck. "Clearly," Rebecca replied. "Michael called. Said you were being difficult about selling. It's been 4 days since we buried him, Becca. 4 days, and you two are already carving up the place like vultures." Rebecca's expression hardened at the childhood nickname. "It's been decided for years, Sarah. Dad's death just makes it official. This place hasn't turned a real profit in a decade. You've been propping it up with your furniture restoration and Dad's pension. It's time to be practical." "Practical," Sarah repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "Is that what you call filing legal papers to force a sale before our father is cold in his grave?" "Michael's expediting things, yes. Because we both know you'd hold on until the bank took everything, out of some misplaced sentimentality." Rebecca gestured toward the fields, now dusted with snow. "Look at it objectively, Sarah. 300 acres near a growing exurb, with commercial development pushing this direction. The land is worth 3 times as farmland now, and you know it." Sarah did know it. Developers had been circling for years, making offers her father had flatly refused. "And what about Dad's wishes?" "This land has been in our family for generations, yes, I've heard the speech." Rebecca sighed. "Dad's gone, Sarah, and with him goes the obligation to keep working land that barely sustains itself. We all inherit equally." Owner of Westridge Development. "I may have mentioned we'd all be here today. You invited him? Without discussing it with me?" Sarah's voice rose. "We agreed on a week, Michael. He was already in Wichita. It's just a preliminary meeting." Michael straightened his collar. "Be reasonable, Sarah. Let's at least hear what he has to say." Sarah wanted to refuse, to order the developer off the property, but a new thought stopped her. If Westridge Development was somehow connected to the Dietrich organization, if they were looking for the money her father had siphoned for decades, maybe meeting Howard Westridge would reveal something useful. "Fine," she said finally. "One conversation. But nothing gets decided today." Howard Westridge was in his 60s, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced to the perfect balance of warmth and authority. "Ms. Miller," he said, nodding to Sarah, "my condolences on your loss. Your father was a fixture in this community." "You knew my father?" Sarah asked, immediately suspicious. "Only by reputation. John Miller was known for his integrity, something increasingly rare these days." Westridge glanced around the farmhouse kitchen where they'd gathered, Rebecca and Michael seated at the table, Sarah standing by the counter. "I understand you have reservations about our offer." "I have reservations about selling my family's land to a developer who plans to pave it over for strip malls, yes." Westridge smiled indulgently. "I understand your attachment, Ms. Miller, but our plans for Meadow Creek would preserve much of the natural character of this property." "Meadow Creek?" Sarah repeated. "Our planned community. Sustainable housing, community gardens, walking trails, a place where people can connect with nature while enjoying modern amenities." He pulled a glossy brochure from his briefcase and laid it on the table. We've designed it with respect for the land's heritage. The rendering showed an upscale development of craftsman-style homes clustered around green spaces, with the old barn preserved as a community center. It was tasteful, thoughtfully designed, and utterly foreign to the working farm that had existed here for generations. "And you're offering $7 million, no inspection, cash deal," Sarah said flatly. "Why the rush? Why so much over market value?" Something flickered in Westridge's eyes, caution perhaps. "Location is everything in our business, Ms. Miller. This property is perfectly situated for our expansion plans. As for the inspection waiver, it streamlines the process for everyone involved. We're prepared to take on whatever issues might exist." Like a secret room full of evidence and cash beneath the grain storage, Sarah thought. "What's your connection to Chicago, Mr. Westridge?" she asked abruptly. The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the room. Rebecca shot her a confused look. Michael stiffened. "I'm based there," Westridge replied smoothly. "Have been for 30 years. Why do you ask?" "Just curious about who's buying our family legacy." Sarah held his gaze. "Did you know the Dietrich family, by any chance?" "Heinrich Dietrich, the banker?" The change in Westridge was subtle but unmistakable, a tightening around the eyes, a slight shift in posture. "The name isn't familiar. Banking circles are quite large in Chicago." He was lying. Sarah was certain of it. "Sarah, what does any of this matter?" Rebecca interrupted impatiently. "Mr. Westridge is offering us a chance to move forward. All of us." "Your sister is right," Westridge said, his composure recovered. "The past is the past. This offer is about the future, your future, free from the burdens this land has placed on your family." Michael leaned forward. "We're very interested, Mr. Westridge. My sister just needs a few days to process everything. The funeral was very recent." "Of course." Westridge nodded sympathetically. "Grief requires its own timeline. But I should mention our offer is time-sensitive. The board meets next Wednesday to finalize our expansion plan. If we haven't secured this property by then, we'll need to pursue our alternate location." The implied threat hung in the air. 7 days, coincidentally, the exact amount of time Sarah had requested to get her father's affairs in order. "We understand," Michael assured him. "You'll have our decision by Tuesday." After Westridge left, the kitchen erupted into argument. "What the hell was that about?" Rebecca demanded. "Grilling him about Chicago bankers? Are you trying to sabotage this deal?" "There's something off about this whole situation," Sarah insisted. "The timing, the overmarket offer, the no inspection clause." "The only thing off is your perspective," Michael said. "You're looking for reasons to hold on to this place, even when letting go is clearly the best option for everyone." "You don't understand what's at stake," Sarah said, thinking of the trapdoor beneath the grain, of her father's 40-year mission. "Then enlighten us," Rebecca challenged. "What exactly was in that letter Dad left you? What secrets are you keeping that are worth throwing away $2 million each?" Sarah hesitated. How could she explain her father's double life? The fortune hidden beneath the barn, the decades-long vendetta against a Chicago crime family. They would think she was crazy. Or worse, they'd believe her and want their share of the hidden money that wasn't really John Miller's to give. Money that rightfully belonged to the foundation her father had established for victims of organized crime. "It's complicated," she finally said. "I need time to figure things out." "You have until Tuesday," Michael said firmly. "Then we vote on the offer. Majority rules." That night, after her siblings had gone Michael to a hotel in town, refusing to stay in his childhood bedroom, Rebecca back to the Ridgeway. Sarah returned to the grain room. The harvest moon cast silver light through the high windows, illuminating the space with an ethereal glow. Sarah cleared the grain from the trapdoor, descended the ladder, and knelt before the floor safe. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the combination. March 14, 78, the day her father met Anna Dietrich. The day that changed his life forever. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside were several document folders, a leather portfolio, stacks of $100 bills bound in paper bands, and a small box wrapped in velvet cloth. Sarah started with the folders, spreading them on the small table in the center of the room. The first contained detailed instructions for transferring the assets to the Anna Dietrich Memorial Foundation, account numbers, contact protocols, verification methods. Everything had been meticulously planned. The second folder held Sarah's escape plan, a new identity complete with driver's license, passport, credit cards, and deed to a property in Montana. Jane Wilson, the documents declared her. Born in Oregon, no living family, self-employed furniture restorer. The third folder contained what appeared to be her father's evidence. Against the Dietrich organization, photocopies of ledgers, photographs of men in suits exchanging briefcases, transcripts of recorded conversations. Damning material, spanning decades, annotated in her father's precise handwriting. The leather portfolio held property deeds, dozens of them, for land across 5 states, all purchased through various shell companies and trusts that eventually led back to John Miller. Her father had reinvested the money he'd siphoned from the Dietrich accounts into legitimate assets, building a parallel empire that had remained completely hidden from his family. Finally, Sarah unwrapped the velvet cloth from the small box. Inside was a diamond ring antique setting, large center stone flanked by smaller diamonds. A note in her father's handwriting read, "Anna's engagement ring." She left it behind that last weekend, saying she'd wear it forever once she returned. Now it's yours, a reminder that some promises transcend time. Beneath the ring was a photograph Sarah hadn't seen before, her father and Anna, sitting on the farmhouse porch, laughing. They looked so young, so full of hope. On the back, in a feminine script that must have been Anna's, "To my dearest John, thank you for showing me what really matters. All my love, forever, Anna." Sarah sat back on her heels, overwhelmed by the weight of her father's secret life. The man she thought she knew, practical, straightforward, sometimes stern, had been driven by a love story that ended in tragedy and a quest for justice that spanned 4 decades. While raising 3 children, while working the land, while maintaining the pretense of a simple farmer's life, he had been methodically dismantling a criminal enterprise responsible for murder. And now, the people connected to that enterprise, whether Howard Westridge himself or whoever he represented, were trying to acquire the farm. Perhaps they'd never identified John Miller as the source of their financial bleeding, but they might have traced it to this general area. Buying the property would give them unrestricted access to search for whatever was draining their accounts. Sarah needed to complete her father's mission before Tuesday's deadline. But how could she transfer millions in assets without alerting Michael and Rebecca? How could she disappear afterward without raising suspicions? And most importantly, how could she protect the farm itself, not just for sentimental reasons, but because this land held both evidence and justice? The calico cat appeared at the top of the ladder, meowing softly before making her way down to rub against Sarah's legs. Her belly was noticeably smaller. "You had your kittens," Sarah murmured, stroking the cat's fur. "Where have you hidden them?" The cat purred, circling Sarah's ankles before climbing back up the ladder, pausing at the top as if waiting. Sarah gathered the most critical documents, returned the rest to the safe, and followed the cat up into the grain room. The feline led her to a corner behind some stacked crates, where 5 tiny kittens nestled in an old horse blanket, mewling softly. Life continuing, even amidst secrets and turmoil. Her father would have appreciated the symmetry of it, new beginnings emerging from hidden places. By dawn, Sarah had formulated a plan. It was risky, dependent on timing and trust, but it honored both her father's mission and his love for the land. She began with a call to Lawrence Holloway. "I need to execute some transfers," she told him. "Today, and I need absolute discretion." The next call was to Professor Amelia Wilson at Kansas State University's Agricultural Extension program, an expert in sustainable farming practices who'd consulted with her father occasionally over the years. "I have a proposition for you," Sarah said when the professor answered, "about the future of Miller Farms." Her third call was the most difficult to Daniel Jeffries, an FBI agent based in Kansas City whose name had appeared in her father's notes as trustworthy, unconnected to Chicago interests. "My name is Sarah Miller," she said when she reached him. "My father was John Miller. He left information for me to pass to you regarding the Dietrich organization in Chicago." By mid-morning, Sarah had set all the pieces in motion. She worked methodically through her father's instructions, transferring assets to the foundation through the secure protocols he'd established. Lawrence Holloway handled the legal details, marveling at the complexity of the arrangements while maintaining the confidentiality he'd promised. "Your father was an extraordinary man," he told Sarah as they completed the final transfers. "Far more than anyone realized." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "He was." With the transfers complete, nearly $40 million moved to the Foundation for Victims of Organized Crime. Sarah returned to the farm. The FBI would move on the information within days, bringing down what remained of Heinrich Dietrich's criminal network. Howard Westridge, whether directly involved or merely a front, would find his development plan suddenly complicated by federal investigations. But Sarah's most immediate concern was securing the farm itself. Michael and Rebecca would still push for the sale, FBI investigation or not. She needed leverage, something that would convince them to preserve the land without revealing the full truth about their father's secret life. She found it in the last folder from the floor safe, one she hadn't fully examined until now. It contained legal documents establishing a conservation easement on the property signed by John Miller years ago but never filed. The easement would permanently restrict development on the land, ensuring it remained agricultural regardless of ownership. Attached was a note in her father's handwriting: "Use only if necessary to protect what matters." Sarah made copies, then drove to the Ridgeway Hotel to find Rebecca. Her sister answered the door in yoga pants and a silk blouse, her laptop open on the desk behind her. "We need to talk," Sarah said. "Alone, before Michael involves himself." Rebecca's expression was wary, but she stepped aside to let Sarah enter. "If this is another plea for more time, it's not." Sarah placed the conservation easement documents on the desk. "Dad prepared these years ago. I'm filing them tomorrow unless we reach an agreement today." Rebecca scanned the papers, her expression shifting from confusion to anger. This would make the farm worthless to developers. "You can't do this unilaterally." "Actually, I can. Dad gave me power of attorney regarding the land management decisions 3 years ago. You and Michael never bothered to ask about the farm operations, so you wouldn't have known." Rebecca sank onto the edge of the bed. "Why are you doing this? Why fight so hard to keep a place that's been nothing but burden and sacrifice?" Sarah sat beside her sister. "Because it's not just land, Becca. It's our heritage. And it could be our future if we're willing to reimagine it." "What does that even mean?" "I've been talking with Kansas State's Agricultural Extension program. They've been looking for a working farm to establish as a teaching and research facility for sustainable farming practices. They'd lease most of the acreage from us at fair market value, maintain the operations with student and faculty labor, and establish an endowed chair in Dad's name." Rebecca looked skeptical. "And this would generate enough income to be viable?" "More than we're making now. The university's backing means stable, guaranteed income. We'd retain ownership, preserve Dad's legacy, and contribute to the future of farming in a region that badly needs innovation." "And where would you live?" "I'd keep 10 acres around the house and barn for myself. The rest would be leased to the university." Rebecca was silent for a long moment, studying her sister. "You've put a lot of thought into this. It's what Dad would have wanted. Not selling to developers who would erase everything he built, but evolving the farm to face the future. And what about Michael? He'll never agree. That's where you come in. He'll listen to you. He always has." Rebecca laughed softly. "That's because I usually tell him what he wants to hear." She picked up the easement documents again, reading more carefully this time. "If I help convince Michael, what's in it for me? Your share of the lease income. Connection to something meaningful, and—" Sarah hesitated, then decided on a calculated risk. "There's something else. Dad left some additional assets that will be revealed soon. Trust me when I say they're significant. But they can only be accessed if we maintain control of the farm." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "What kind of assets?" "I can't explain everything yet. Legal complications. But I promise you won't be disappointed if you trust me on this." The next morning, the three Miller siblings gathered at the farmhouse kitchen table, the same table where they'd eaten breakfast together as children, where their father had paid bills by lamplight during power outages, where their mother had taught them to roll pie crust on cold winter afternoons. Michael was skeptical, combative, resistant to change. The battle raged for hours, voices rising, old resentment surfacing, new accusations flying. But gradually, with Rebecca's unexpected support, Sarah's plan gained traction. The conservation easement documents lay on the table like a silent threat. But it was the promise of the university partnership's stable income, preserved ownership, enhanced prestige that finally broke through Michael's resistance. "I won't pretend to understand your attachment to this place," he told Sarah as they finalized their agreement. "But I respect your determination to find a way forward that works for all of us." By evening, the new future of Miller Farms had been secured. The university partnership would begin next spring. The conservation easement would be filed but modified to accommodate the educational mission, while still preventing commercial development. Howard Westridge's offer would be declined. As dusk fell, Sarah stood alone in the barn, the enormity of what she'd accomplished settling over her. She had honored her father's mission, transferring the recovered funds to help victims of organized crime. She had secured the farm's future without revealing the full truth about the secret beneath the grain. And she had found her own path forward, not running to Montana under a new identity as her father had arranged, but standing her ground on the land that had shaped her. The calico cat appeared with one of her kittens, a tiny orange ball of fluff that mewed softly in the gathering darkness. Sarah knelt to stroke its soft fur, feeling the vibration of its purr against her fingertips. "We're staying," she told the cat. "This is home." Later that night, Sarah returned to the secret room one final time. She gathered the remaining cash enough to establish a comfortable reserve, fund but not so much as to raise suspicions, and the personal mementos of her father's secret life, Anna's ring, their photographs, the letters they'd exchanged. These weren't evidence to be turned over to the FBI or assets to be transferred to the foundation. They were the human heart of a story that had shaped her family in ways she was only beginning to understand. As she closed the trapdoor for the final time and replaced the grain above it, Sarah felt a sense of completion. Her father had carried his burden alone for 40 years. Now she had helped him lay it down at last. Outside, the first snowflakes of a new storm were beginning to fall, dusting the fields with white. The barn stood solid against the night sky, its weathered frame housing both old secrets and new beginnings. The farmhouse windows glowed with warm light, beckoning her home. In the distance, a coyote called a wild, lonely sound that carried across the open fields. Another answered from closer to the creek, a conversation in the darkness. Life continuing, adapting, finding its way forward. Sarah walked toward the house, her boots leaving tracks in the fresh snow tracks that would be covered by morning. Just as the trapdoor was hidden beneath the grain, just as her father's true life had been concealed beneath the identity he showed the world. Some legacies were visible: the land, the buildings, the Miller name on the weathered sign. Others remained hidden: the justice served in secret, the love lost but never forgotten, the quiet courage of a man who had balanced two worlds for the sake of a promise. Sarah paused on the porch, looking back at the barn one last time. The snow was falling harder now, transforming the familiar landscape into something new yet eternal. Tomorrow would bring FBI agents asking questions, university representatives discussing plans, siblings navigating their new relationships with each other and with the land that had both divided and united them. But tonight, in this moment between what had been and what would be, Sarah stood at the threshold of her inheritance, not just the farm her father had worked, but the truth he had protected, the justice he had served, and the love that had driven him through 40 years of patient determination. She opened the door and stepped inside, carrying with her all that had been revealed beneath the grain, and all that would remain forever hidden in the heart of the land she called home. 6 months passed like a deep breath across the land. Winter released its grip reluctantly, giving way to a Kansas spring that arrived with startling swiftness, one day barren branches and frozen ground, the next tender green shoots pushing through thawed soil, defiant and alive. Sarah watched the transformation from the farmhouse porch, coffee mug warming her hands in the chill morning air, the same way her father had started every day for 63 years. The FBI investigation into the Dietrich organization had unfolded with the quiet precision of a well-oiled machine. Howard Westridge, whose real name turned out to be Howard Dietrich, nephew of Heinrich, was arrested along with 17 others connected to a network of financial crimes spanning 4 decades. The Anna Dietrich Memorial Foundation received what the Justice Department called the largest private restitution transfer in agency history, though the details remained sealed by court order. Only Sarah knew the full truth, that her father, a seemingly ordinary wheat farmer, had been the architect of the operation that finally brought down a criminal empire. Daniel Jeffries, the FBI agent, had kept his promise to protect John Miller's identity, allowing his role to remain a footnote in sealed federal documents rather than newspaper headlines. "Your father was a remarkable man," Jeffries had told Sarah during their final meeting. "Most people who suffer the kind of loss he did either break or seek immediate revenge. He played the long game for 40 years, never losing sight of his purpose." He was patient, Sarah had agreed, in all things. Now, as April sunshine warmed the awakening fields, Sarah could see the first evidence of the Kansas State Agricultural Program's presence on the farm. Survey stakes marked areas designated for different research plots. A weather station had been installed near the old windmill. Graduate students came and went, their enthusiasm for sustainable farming practices bringing new energy to land that had seen generations of the same methods. Professor Wilson had become a regular visitor, her silver-streaked hair usually escaping a hasty bun as she gestured animatedly about crop rotation innovations or soil enrichment techniques. She had taken to joining Sarah for coffee on the porch some mornings, the two women finding common ground in their love for the land and respect for its potential. "Your father was ahead of his time," Amelia observed one such morning. "These soil composition reports show he was using cover crops and minimal tilling long before it became fashionable in academic circles." Sarah smiled. He wasn't one for fashion, just believed in respecting the earth that fed us. The university partnership had proven more successful than even Sarah had hoped. The steady income from the lease had already paid off the farm's outstanding debts. The research being conducted was generating interest in agricultural circles across the Midwest. And most surprising, Michael and Rebecca had both begun taking a more active interest in the farm's evolution. Michael had connected the university with potential corporate sponsors interested in sustainable farming research. His finance background, once used to advocate for selling the property, was now helping establish an endowment that would ensure the program's long-term viability. Rebecca had been slower to re-engage, but 3 months after their agreement, she had arrived unannounced one weekend, laptop in hand. "I'm thinking of documenting this," she'd said, gesturing around the farm. The transition from traditional family farm to research facility. The preservation of agricultural heritage while embracing innovation. Could be an interesting case study. Sarah had simply nodded, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. Today was different, though. Today all 3 Miller siblings would be together on the farm for the first time since their agreement. The occasion was both solemn and hopeful, the dedication of the John Miller Center for Sustainable Agriculture, marked by the installation of a bronze plaque on the barn that had stood for over a century. Sarah had spent the week preparing cleaning the farmhouse until it shone, airing out Michael and Rebecca's old rooms, baking their father's favorite blackberry cobbler from berries she'd frozen last summer. Small gestures of reconciliation, of welcome, of shared history. The sound of tires on gravel announced Michael's arrival. His Chicago sedan looked out of place in the farmyard, too sleek and polished beside Sarah's mud-splashed truck. But Michael himself had changed in subtle ways, his designer suits replaced today by khakis and a button-down shirt. His usual brisk efficiency softened somewhat as he embraced Sarah. "Place looks good," he said, surveying the farm with new eyes. "The university people aren't tearing up the fields as much as I expected." "Professor Wilson is big on minimal disruption," Sarah explained. "They're introducing changes gradually, documenting results as they go." Michael nodded approval. "Smart, better data that way." Rebecca arrived an hour later, her rental car followed by a second vehicle Sarah didn't recognize. When both parked, Rebecca emerged with a man Sarah had never met, tall, with salt and pepper hair and glasses, carrying what looked like professional camera equipment. "Hope you don't mind," Rebecca said after quick hugs were exchanged. "This is David Chen, documentary filmmaker. He's interested in the project I mentioned." The 4 of them stood awkwardly in the yard for a moment, the weight of family history and recent change hanging between them. Then Sarah smiled. "Dad would have hated all this attention, but I think he'd like what we're doing with the place." They spent the morning touring the farm, showing David and Michael the research plots, the new equipment shed the university had built, the old orchard now being restored with heritage apple varieties. Rebecca recorded interviews with several graduate students, while David captured footage of the land from different angles. His experienced eye finding beauty in details Sarah had long taken for granted, the weathered grain of the barn siding, the contrast of new green wheat against dark soil, the play of light through the old oak trees' emerging leaves. By mid-afternoon, the university representatives began arriving for the dedication ceremony. Professor Wilson, the Dean of Agriculture, several faculty members, and a small group of students who had been working on the farm. They gathered in front of the barn, where a cloth-covered plaque waited to be unveiled. Sarah felt a momentary pang, wishing her father could see this gathering people who valued the land not just for what it could produce, but for what it could teach. John Miller had never sought recognition. His entire adult life had been built around a private mission and a public persona that revealed only part of who he truly was. This ceremony would honor the farmer everyone knew, not the justice seeker whose story remained hidden with Sarah alone. The dean spoke briefly about the partnership and the vision for the center. Professor Wilson talked about John Miller's farming practices and how they had preserved the soil quality through decades when many neighboring farms had suffered erosion and depletion. Then, unexpectedly, Michael stepped forward. "I'd like to say something about our father," he said, his voice carrying across the farmyard. John Miller wasn't a man of many words. He believed actions spoke louder, and his actions said everything about what mattered to him. This land, his family. Doing what was right, even when it was difficult. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Michael had never spoken of their father this way before. "I left this farm as soon as I could," Michael continued. "Thought success meant skyscrapers instead of silos, boardrooms instead of barns. It took me 45 years to understand what my father knew all along, that true success isn't measured in dollars or titles, but in leaving something better than you found it." He gestured to the fields stretching around them. "Dad left this land better than he found it. And now, through this partnership, it will continue to improve, to teach, to feed. There's no legacy he would have valued more." Rebecca joined her brother, adding her own brief reflection. "Our father was a complicated man, private, sometimes distant. But he was always guided by a clear sense of purpose. I think he would be proud to see his life's work continuing in a new form, touching lives beyond our family." Sarah was the last to speak. Standing before the gathered crowd, she felt the weight of everything she knew, the full truth of her father's life, the secret beneath the grain, the love story that had shaped decades of quiet determination. None of that could be shared. But the essence of it, the heart of who John Miller had been, that she could honor. "My father believed in justice," she said simply. "In his farming, in his business dealings, in his family relationships. He believed that doing the right thing mattered, even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching." She reached for the cloth covering the plaque. "The John Miller Center for Sustainable Agriculture will carry forward that commitment to doing right by the land, by the community, and by future generations who will need what this soil can provide." With a gentle tug, she unveiled the bronze plaque. Beneath her father's name and the center's official designation was a quote Sarah had chosen. Words her father had often repeated when teaching her about farming. "We don't inherit the land from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children." The small crowd applauded, and then conversation resumed. Groups forming and reforming as people discussed the center's plans. Shared memories of John Miller or simply enjoyed the spring afternoon on the farm. Sarah found herself standing slightly apart, watching her siblings engage with the university people, seeing the farm through new eyes. A touch on her arm startled her. Professor Wilson had appeared beside her, holding out a small envelope. "This arrived for you at my office," she said. "The sender asked that I deliver it privately." The envelope bore no return address, just Sarah's name in unfamiliar handwriting. She opened it carefully, finding a single photograph inside. It showed a bench in what appeared to be a Chicago park, overlooking a lake. On the back was written, "Anna's favorite place," now marked with her name. "Thank you for completing what your father began. DJ Daniel Jeffries." The FBI agent. He had found a way to publicly honor Anna Dietrich without revealing the full story. "Good news?" Professor Wilson asked, noting Sarah's expression. "Just confirmation that some things work out as they should," Sarah replied, tucking the photo into her pocket. As evening approached, the university contingent departed, leaving the three Miller siblings alone on the farm for the first time in years. They moved to the porch, settling into the familiar rhythm of shared space, Michael in their father's chair. Rebecca perched on the railing, Sarah leaning against the post, all facing the sunset that painted the wheat fields gold. "I've been meaning to ask," Rebecca said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Those additional assets you mentioned when convincing me to support the university partnership. Was that real or just leverage?" Sarah smiled. "It was real. Dad had some investments nobody knew about. They've been liquidated and divided into 3 equal trusts. Lawrence Holloway has the paperwork ready whenever you want to sign." "How much?" Michael asked, his old financial acumen surfacing. "Enough," Sarah said. "Enough that neither of you will ever need to worry about retirement. Enough that your children can go to any college they choose. Enough that this farm will never need to be sold to pay medical bills or property taxes." Rebecca shook her head in wonder. "All these years we thought he was just getting by. Where did it come from? Dad was smarter than any of us gave him credit for, Sarah said, the partial truth easier to offer than an outright lie. He invested carefully over decades, lived simply so he could leave something meaningful behind. Michael raised his glass of whiskey, their father's favorite brand, poured in his honor. To Dad, a better man than I understood while he was alive. To Dad, the sisters echoed. As darkness settled over the farm, they really talked for the first time in decades. About their childhoods on this land. About their mother's illness and how it had changed them all. About the different paths they'd taken away from and now, partially back to the farm. I'm thinking of spending summers here, Rebecca said unexpectedly. David is interested in documenting the farm through all 4 seasons. And I could use the quiet to finish my book. Your book? Sarah asked. I've been working on something about the evolution of rural America. This place, what we're doing with it, fits perfectly into that narrative. Michael nodded. I've been talking with some investment groups about replicating this model. Family farms partnering with research institutions, creating sustainable operations that preserve agricultural heritage while embracing innovation. There's real potential there. Sarah listened, marveling at how the farm was pulling her siblings back in ways she never could have imagined 6 months ago. Not to the life she had chosen working the land day in and day out, but to a relationship with the place that had shaped them all. Later that night, after Michael and Rebecca had gone to bed in their childhood rooms, Sarah walked alone to the barn. The new plaque gleamed in the moonlight, her father's name rendered permanent in bronze. She ran her fingers over the letters, thinking of all the man had been: farmer, father, widower, secret avenger, keeper of promises. The calico cat appeared from the shadows, winding around Sarah's ankles. Her kittens, now half-grown, tumbled after her, playing in the moonlight. He would have liked this, Sarah told the cat. Not the recognition, but knowing the farm would continue. That his work mattered. Inside the barn, Sarah climbed to the hayloft, her childhood hiding place, her teenage retreat, her adult sanctuary. From the small window there, she could see the entire farm spread below her, the fields now marked with the university's experimental plots. The old orchard being restored, the creek that formed the property's western boundary. Hidden beneath the grain room floor, the trapdoor remained a secret history known only to Sarah now. She had removed the most personal items, the photographs, Anna's ring, the letters, but left the empty safe as a testament to her father's extraordinary determination. Perhaps someday, when the Dietrich case was a distant memory and all the principals had passed on, she would tell Michael and Rebecca the full story. Perhaps not. Some secrets belonged to the land itself. In her pocket, Sarah felt the weight of Anna's ring, which she now carried daily as a tangible connection to the love story that had shaped her family's destiny. She had considered burying it somewhere on the farm, a symbolic returning of Anna's presence to the place where she had found happiness with John Miller. But something had stopped her. The ring represented not just love lost, but justice finally served. It deserved to remain with the living. Dawn found Sarah still in the barn, having dozed in the hayloft as she had so many times in her youth. She climbed down and walked outside to find Rebecca already on the porch with coffee, her laptop open, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Early start?" Sarah asked, accepting a mug. Rebecca nodded. "Woke up with the scene I've been trying to write for weeks suddenly clear in my head. Something about being here." Michael emerged a few minutes later, phone to his ear, already deep in conversation about funding models and research priorities. He paused his call long enough to pour coffee and offer a silent toast toward the fields where their father had worked every day of his adult life. The 3 siblings sat together as the sun rose fully over Miller Farms, now the John Miller Center for Sustainable Agriculture. The land stretched before them, forever changed yet fundamentally the same. The soil that had supported 5 generations of Millers would now educate generations of students. The barn that had housed harvests and secrets would now shelter innovations and research. And beneath it all, known only to Sarah, lay the story of a love so powerful it had driven a quiet farmer to dismantle an empire. $1 at a time, over 40 patient years. "I think I'm going to restore Dad's old tractor," Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The students should see how farming used to be done." "I have some contacts at the Smithsonian," Rebecca offered. "They might be interested in documenting the restoration for their agricultural history archives." Michael laughed. "Look at us. The prodigal siblings, suddenly embracing heritage." "Not suddenly," Sarah corrected gently. "We just needed time to understand what Dad always knew, that this land is more than dirt and crops. It's memory and promise, all at once." As if to punctuate her words, a meadowlark began to sing from a fence post nearby. Its clear notes carrying across fields that had witnessed birth and death, love and loss, secrets and revelations all held in the patient custody of soil that forgave every transgression and renewed itself with each passing season. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.